Welcome, everyone. We have we now have all of our panel, and so we'll get started. And as people join us, they join us. For those who are unaware and who are not part of St. John's who are joining us, I'm Megan Clark. I'm an associate professor in the theology department and co-chair of our St. John's CRS Global Campus Committee. One of the things that our committee does is put on a series of lectures and events over the course of the academic year. And we are really excited about this one for many reasons. Along with Victoria O'Keefe, who is my co-chair, we'll be hosting this event. And in a minute, I'll turn things over to our panel, or presenter, and then our panel. But as we go, if anybody has any questions or, things that you'd like to ask, you can put them either in the Q&A or the chat function, which you should be able to see on the side panel. And Victoria and myself will be monitoring that. So when we get to the open questions, we'll raise any questions that we have time for. As is our practice, we start all of our events with a prayer. And since this time we have a student responding panel, I'm just going to open us with prayer. And I've taken this from CRS's prayer resources, although it's actually one from this month last year, entitled Show Me My Neighbor. Lord of all love, as I step out the door, show me my neighbor. As I read the news, show me my neighbor. As I pray, show me my neighbor. On my left, on my right, perhaps turning to me right now, show me my neighbor. Where my eyes have passed before and then turned away, show me my neighbor. Where my ears have heard cries that I have ignored, show me my neighbor. As they share a story that is different from my story, help me to listen as if it is my own. Show me my neighbor, and then let me love them in their joy and in their distress, that their delight be mine and their pain be mine too. Let me love them as completely and mercifully as you love me. In true solidarity, singing our songs together until a new song emerges. Let me love them. I look up now, Lord. Show me my neighbor. Amen. I am I'm very excited for today, in particular, because I've known our presenter for quite a few years. And it's been wonderful to see my friend get to work with CRS and into this field. Clare Gooding is a program manager with CRS Laos, where she manages a capacity strengthening program working with the Laos Ministry of Health to improve the quality of nutrition research in Laos. She joined CRS in 2018 through their fellowship program and was posted in Sierra Leone and Ghana. Clare has her master's degree in international business from the Fletcher School at Tufts University. Before returning to school, Clare worked in operations for the American Refugee Committee as a caseworker in East Africa for the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. Back in 2011, she interned for the Holy See Mission to the United Nations here in New York, which is where I and a number of the other professors on our committee first met her and got to know her. So I'm going to turn things over now to Clare for her presentation. And then after that, I will introduce our student responders, and they will open up the conversation. So I turn things over to Clare.
Well, thank you, Dr. Clark. I am so thrilled to be here with you all today. Gracie, and Lauren, I'm really looking forward to our conversation. This is a neat interactive way to talk about this. So I am just going to quickly turn off my video and then I'll start my presentation here. I presume that many of you, if you're joining us today, may have heard about CRS, but just in case some of you are new, I wanted to first give you a quick overview of who Catholic Relief Services is. We were founded in 1943 by the Catholic bishops of the United States to serve World War II survivors in Europe. Since that time, CRS has expanded in size to reach more than 130 million people in over 100 countries on 5 continents. We have close to 7,000 employees, and a vast majority of our employees are actually nationals from the countries where we work. Over the last 75 years, our mission has been to assist the impoverished and disadvantaged people overseas, working in the spirit of Catholic social teaching to promote the sacredness of human life and the dignity of the human person. Although our mission is rooted in the Catholic faith, our operations serve people based solely on need, regardless of their race, religion, or ethnicity. Many of you may know Catholic Charities in the United States, and in essence, that is the domestic arm of the American Catholic Church, and CRS is the international arm. So as I thought about what I wanted to share with you today, I decided to focus in on what I would have wanted to know 10 years ago when I was in your shoes in college. I went to the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota, which is a mid-sized Catholic liberal arts college very similar to St. John's. Back then, the thought of working for CRS was still a bit of a hope, a possible track, but I was unclear of how I could get to it. And to back up, I should share that my hope of working for CRS actually began when I was 15. I have been blessed to be raised in a family and in a community where faith and action have always come hand in hand. Mass on Sundays and love for Christ have always been supported by tangible work either at our local homeless shelter, crisis pregnancy centers, assisting the undocumented through a Catholic worker house we are a part of, and even working to reduce our family's impact on the environment through things like recycling and water conservation. Powerhouse figures like Dorothy Day, Mother Teresa, John Paul II were figures that I grew up admiring. And as a teenager, they are what inspired me with the thought of a career that could emulate their service for the poor. So I can remember the exact conversation at the kitchen table, again, I was about 15, when my father and I were discussing college and what I wanted to do, and he turned to me and picked up a rice bowl off the table. So here's a photo. Some of you who went to Catholic schools or grew up in Catholic parishes may know this. CRS distributes these all over the United States during Lent. It's a way for Catholics to give alms to accompany their Lenten journey. So we had one on our table. I grew up every Lent with one. And he picked it up and goes, "What if you worked for Catholic Relief Services?" And it kind of hit me, this would have been a combination of the social and the charity work which inspired me in conjunction with the Catholic Church, where my belief in Christ and the gospel was rooted. And so with this kind of stuck in my mind, when you're 15 and you don't really know where you want to go in life, you just kind of grab onto something. And man, did this stick. I ended up using it as kind of my North Star then for the next 10 years. In college, I majored in international studies with a minor in Catholic studies and business. I had a year-long internship my junior year with a local humanitarian agency in Minneapolis, the American Refugee Committee, as Dr. Clark mentioned. This internship was really helpful because it exposed me to the practical and operational side of humanitarian work while I was still in my undergrad. And then after college, I took a one-year internship with the Holy See, where I met Dr. Clark and her father, also Dr. Clark, and got to know the UN system and the global Church's role in advocating for the poor and vulnerable. It's a very unique place in world politics that the Church holds. After this, I was able to get a job with the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, the USRAP. This was in East Africa. I was based in Kenya, but I covered the East African region with regular travels to Ethiopia, Rwanda, and Uganda. I worked in refugee camps and in urban centers, processed mainly Somali and Congolese refugees who were seeking admissions to the U.S. through the legal U.S. admissions program. After a few years of working in East Africa, I ended up returning to Minnesota to marry my husband, Rob, while he was in art school here. And I went back to work for the same humanitarian organization that I'd interned for in college. And it was with this organization that I got interested specifically in the operational side of INGOs, which are international non-governmental organizations. CRS is, of course, one of them. You know, I learned that the quality leadership takes a keen sense of financial policy and organizational structure, and I saw this gap in my own education. So this pushed me towards a master's in business, which I got next at Fletcher School at Tufts in Boston. Through all these choices, whether new jobs, moving around, going back to school, I always had in the back of my mind the CRS Fellowship. This is an amazing program for candidates after your master's who have international experience, who have a second language, and most importantly, a desire to work for CRS. I have the link there at the bottom, but if you Google CRS Development Fellowship, they have an excellent website with a lot of information. So as I'm talking here, I definitely welcome you to kind of check it out, and I can answer questions during our conversation at the end. Preparing myself for this fellowship did require me to test out new skills, to learn from other organizations, and all of this was kind of the focus of my 20s. Following grad school, I applied for the fellowship and was accepted. Thank goodness, because it had been my, guiding star for about 10 years. And at the time, I had actually just had my first daughter, Sienna, who you see there in the first picture. This was my first day of training for the fellowship in Baltimore, and Sienna was 1 month old. I look back at this, and I still don't know how I made it through that training, but it all worked, God's grace. And I think the whole time my husband was such a champ. He's carrying her around, and I'm going to trainings every day, and he's bringing her so she could feed. It was quite a time for us. And it was together that the three of us then ended up going to work for CRS in Sierra Leone in West Africa. My husband is a filmmaker, but I say that we went to work for CRS together because it's only through his support that my work with CRS has been possible. And I think this is true for many marriages, that following your passion and your vocation is only as possible or as strong as the family that backs you up and supports you, especially when you're dragging them all around the world. The second photo is from my fellowship. This is a group of some of my phenomenal colleagues from the Freetown office. My first year there, they were my teachers. They onboarded me onto CRS's financial, HR, and administrative policies. And I am so grateful for the time and energy they invested in me as a fellow. And this is what you can expect from the fellowship. You will be placed in a country program. You don't get to choose that country program, so you have to be quite flexible. So you get based there, and the national staff really invest in you and help to teach you about CRS. And in this way, your growth within the agency is fostered from day one. So this was close to 3 years ago now. After 8 months in the fellowship in Sierra Leone and then a few months in Ghana, we finally moved to Laos, where I had gotten a permanent program manager position with CRS. We were there until last March when coronavirus hit, and I was pregnant with my second daughter, and so that deemed us high risk, and we had to come back to the U.S. Since then, I've been working remotely, and we hope to go back soon as borders reopen. So I thought I might share with you a bit about some of the projects I've worked on to give you a flavor for the type of work that this career path could grant you. CRS is, of course, a very large organization with close to 7,000 staff, and I think this year our operating budget is over $1 billion. So So my stories right now are just going to scratch the surface of the type of work that you could expect in this career path. Sierra Leone is a very small country on the west coast of Africa. It is in the top 5 poorest countries in the world, partially due to the devastating civil war in the 90s and compounded then by poor infrastructure, corruption, and the very unfortunate outbreak of Ebola, which really devastated the health system. CRS's largest program there is a school feeding project in the northern province, where we work directly with the Ministry of Education to provide school lunches and literacy programs to over 70,000 school children every day. The project I worked on, however, was new work for CRS in the capital city of Freetown, where CRS has developed a wonderful new relationship with the mayor, Yvonne Aki-Sawyer, who is, I can say without doubt, one of the most inspiring women I have ever met. Mayor Yvonne is turning around the city, and she is doing it by focusing on the very sexy topic of sanitation. Freetown has very large slum areas. There's a big issue with deforestation, and every year there's a torrential rainy season, which unfortunately has triggered devastating mudslides, and oftentimes will wipe away parts of communities where urban planning was not a part of placing their homes. You know, that rain and that poor sanitation unfortunately breeds mosquitoes, which spread malaria and also put the water supply at risk for cholera and typhoid outbreaks. The project we worked on in conjunction with her office and with the Freetown City Council was actually helping city planners to develop a trash collection system and also a community-based drainage clearing project, which could help prevent waste buildup in the drains along the side of the road and then clear it out as it happens. So you can see in these photos, starting clockwise, the first photo is downtown Freetown. It is, I may have painted kind of a bleak picture when you look objectively at Sierra Leone, but this is a country that is on the cusp of blossoming. It is a gorgeous country with a beautiful, beautiful climate, stunning beaches. The people are incredibly friendly, good food. It will be a tourist hotspot one day. And they have some really unique industries that have the potential to take off there. So you walk through these streets of downtown Freetown and you see the possibility, people who are already making their potential. And it was really inspiring to work in that environment. The second photo here is one of the main thoroughfares that has just been built. So there is a really uptick in basic infrastructure development, which is so important for getting goods around, getting trade moving. And then unfortunately, the bottom photo is one of those torrential rainstorms. This rain comes down, and because Freetown is in a bit of a peninsula and then there are mountains around it, when people cut down the trees, which they do so for firewood, for basic human needs, that really weakens the soil structure because there's no longer a root structure to take in all that rain, which means that the rain immediately starts going down these concrete, road tunnels, and then will start coming into some of the slum communities that are all down by the ocean. So you can imagine it's a tricky situation for a mayor coming in and needing to redo a lot of this urban planning. So one of the projects, like I said, was helping to rebuild a waste collection system. Here you see a before, a now, and then this was what we had hoped would be by the end of 2020. Because there wasn't a basic sanitation system in place in the city, again, whether it's because of the Civil War, the years of recovery from the war, Ebola, what we take for granted as a service that your city provides you of picking up your trash is not in place there. So there's oftentimes these large informal dump sites all over the city. And one of the things we worked at was helping to clear those informal dump sites, get them ready for infrastructure, as you see in the middle photo, and then create waste transfer systems where, in this case, young youth could go door to door, make some money, collect waste, and then dump it at a centralized location, and it would be responsibly then moved to one of the larger waste dumps outside the city. I also have here a photo of Mayor Yvonne. I recommend, especially if you're interested in urban planning and resilience, to Google Transform Freetown. This was the name of her plan. She has a remarkable team that has really harnessed the power of social media and marketing, the power of a basic service like WhatsApp to get messages out to her citizens. And I believe she was just named one of Time's top 100 people to watch for the coming year. Idris Alba, who is also a son of Sierra Leone, just wrote a beautiful write-up about her. She, I think, is the future of city leadership across the world, especially as cities are facing new challenges of climate change, of population growth, challenges that have always been in the background, but they're only going to be more important as we go into the next decade. And, this concept that we have of development, for those of you that study it, you know that it's always in more. There's been a lot of lessons learned over the last couple decades. And two areas that CRS focuses heavily on is partnership with the local church and partnership with local government. We partner with government because many of these services are basic civil services which one day the government should be providing, whether that is sanitation, whether it's education, and it does little good for CRS to deliver these on our own without building the capacity of those that one day sustainably should be absorbing them into either the public or the private sector. And likewise, we focus on partnership with the local Catholic Church. This is a part of our mandate. CRS does not go to work in a country until the local bishops' conference has requested us to enter the country. And our country directors, particularly in West Africa, where I was, know the bishops by name and are often on speed dial for assistance and consultation. So one quick initiative just to display for you how this partnership works with local churches is one of the new initiatives CRS has, which is the Sahel Peace Building Project. There has been an unprecedented surge in violence in the Sahel. Those are the countries there shaded in green. There's been more than 6,000 deaths reported in the last 12 months. And this has triggered a whole new level of desperation for families in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. And it's threatening neighboring countries where for decades there has been long-standing peace. And while many people describe the escalating violence in the region as purely religious-based, we know that there are also a lack of economic opportunities, poverty, and climate change that are also real underlying causes to this. Terrorists and other armed groups have been exploiting the religious and ethnic differences that fuel this conflict. But local institutions and governments know that there's more underlying, and they're really struggling to respond because this is a cross-border activity. This is not just this is happening in Mali or this is happening in Niger. These are nomadic cultures, and oftentimes borders mean very little. So the way I understand it is that this violence came up on a phone call between one of the bishops and CRS's regional director in West Africa. And he confided in her how worried he was that how worried he and the bishops were about this, and that the church was seeing this violence was no longer isolated instances, but a regional wave, and it was only growing worse. And the bishops wanted to do something to address this. And in the phone call, it kind of emerged that crafting a response to this type of violence, it was beyond the expertise of the local church. However, it was within CRS's expertise. CRS has peace-building programs all over the world. We have existing operations in that region already. We have boots on the ground in each of these countries. So starting with this simple phone call, a unique movement has now been born, which weaves together the leadership and the vision for peace that the Bishops' Conference have with the technical experts and the operations that CRS has in West Africa. This movement has also been a critical component through CRS's advocacy office in Washington. We're now able to brief U.S. lawmakers on this critical situation in Sahel which will hopefully have a positive impact on the aid and the diplomacy of the U.S. government's response with these countries. So, examples like this, I think they propel solutions which are informed by global best practice, but led by local leadership. And it's really critical to combine those two. So switching tracks a little bit now, one lesson that I have learned and I wish I had thought more concretely about when I was in college and in my early years of working was the value of a vibrant network. Never doubt that where you are right now, you are surrounded by future entrepreneurs, politicians, leaders, academics, people who are going to be shaping the future. You never know one day which of your friends will come to you in a critical hour of need or be the person that you're going to lean upon in a difficult time, a contact that could open up otherwise unavailable opportunities. Your network today is a valuable asset that you should spend time cultivating and appreciating. And these two photos are just a small example of how my college connections 10 years ago ended up impacting positively my work in West Africa. This first photo is of a man named Father Robert. St. Thomas has a seminary attached to it, and we have a relationship with seminaries in Ghana and Uganda, so in both West and East Africa. And Father Robert, at the time, was a young seminarian in Minnesota, and he and I got to know each other because we ate in the same cafeteria. And, we became Facebook friends and have stayed in touch. And when I was in Ghana, we were in northern Ghana, I had posted a photo of my daughter playing in one of the local stadiums. And I get a call from him and goes, Claire, you realize I'm a priest in a parish just north of where you are, and I'm going to be coming through tomorrow. This incredible opportunity for Facebook to make this small world connection. We've had 10 years of experience with each other. And as he drove past our offices, he stopped by and we had a great conversation about his parish is really struggling with income generation. They're really struggling with getting midwives out to their community because they're so rural. And CRS is delivering a lot of those services. So we had a very good conversation about, what potential areas of collaboration could we have here. And in the next photo, again, a gift that came to me through knowing so many of these seminarians when I was in college was when we were in Sierra Leone, a friend of mine said, I know that there are a group of Chestertons working in Sierra Leone up in Kono, which if you've seen Blood Diamond, the movie, that's where a lot of the really critical violence during the Civil War happened. The Chestertons come from G.K. Chesterton. They're a group, oftentimes they have their very specific economic model in mind. And this contact ended up connecting us with this group of farmers which are trying to transition from their young and their families being dependent on the diamond mining industry to producing their own agriculture and finding supply chains back into Freetown. And, CRS in country, we're importing food currently for the school feeding program because there literally is just not enough food production in country. So through this connection, I got to have excellent conversations with farmers to get a better sense of what is it going to take for us to increase your yields, for you to increase your yields, and to be able to enter into a supply chain for school feeding in the country. And these connections, I never could have made them on my own. It was only through, people in my community saying, I know someone, go talk to that person. So I emphasize that for you now because you're in the midst of, embarking on your careers and you're going to start meeting people. And you can really harness things like Facebook, social media to keep in contact. It's been a real critical tool that I've used. So as Dr. Clark mentioned, I'm now with the CRS program in Laos, or Lao PDR. I am the program manager of a capacity building program, which is funded by USAID, and our main partner is the Laos Ministry of Health. Once again, we're working one-on-one with the government, and in this case, it's on strengthening the quality of nutrition research in country. Laos, like many countries, made the difficult decision to close its borders this year to protect its citizens from COVID. and it has successfully managed these infections. They've had only 30 to 40 confirmed cases, truly, and no deaths. So this has been an excellent success, but it has come at a devastating cost for its economy. And like many developing countries, the ramifications of trying to manage this pandemic, they're going to have long-lasting consequences, often to the detriments of the advances that have been made against global poverty in the last decade. In light of this work, CRS has never been more important. Groups like CRS, particularly through our model of local partnership and capacity strengthening. And all across the world, my colleagues are accompanying and collaborating with communities and government to deliver not just critical services, but then to develop the capacity in the systems for those services to then be offered and function on their own. So I think I will stop here. I am so thrilled to be with you guys and really looking forward to our conversation next. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Claire. That was fantastic. Before I turn it over to our student leaders, I just want to introduce each of them, and then they'll open conversation. And I will say from the outset, it is an honor and a privilege, and I'm incredibly proud to be able to introduce these three young women who, once the flyers went out, many faculty members in other, avenues of the university sent me notes saying, "Oh, these are all our students." Every program and every social justice avenue on campus is incredibly proud of these three young ladies. I'm going to introduce them in alphabetical order and then turn it over, and we'll start in alphabetical order. Gracie Bagdan is a junior global development and sustainability major. She's also in the Ozanam Scholars Program. She currently works at the NGO, the Access Challenge, which runs the One by One campaign in partnership with other organizations and the African Union. It is geared towards spreading factual COVID-19 disease and vaccine information in Africa. In her free time, she is passionate about researching and raising awareness for lupus in sub-Saharan African settings. Horan is a fourth-year student in the 5-year MBA program in international business with a minor in Spanish. Lauren is passionate about nonprofit work and hopes to work for a global organization that helps alleviate poverty after graduation. Along with completing the GLOBE program, which is St. John's student-led microfinance program coordinated by Dr. Linda Sama, Lauren is also involved in the Fair Trade Association and has written some papers on social justice issues. And we have Grace Musser, a third-year student working toward a double major in global development and sustainability and anthropology. Grace is serving in her second year as president of St. John's Catholic Relief Services Ambassadors for Global Justice. And thanks to several opportunities, she has been able to advocate to representatives on both the local and national levels. Aside from her involvement with campus ministry, Grace facilitates intergroup dialogues and social justice trainings for the Office of Multicultural Affairs. It is my pleasure to now turn things over and ask Gracie to start and have the students respond and engage in dialogue with Claire. If anyone else who's attending has a question, please put it in the chat, and towards the end, I will raise those as well. Gracie.
Sure. So great presentation. I really enjoyed it. The first kind of topic that I wanted to talk about, you kind of started to mention it, but look at it a little deeper, is what lessons do you think the development world will be able to learn from the experiences that are going on during the pandemic, and apply that to kind of the things that we're going to implement moving forward?
That is the million-dollar question right now. When COVID hit last year, we were just embarking on our new nutrition research project, and we were actually in project design phase. And one of the people from our regional staff who was reviewing the work that I was putting together said, "What is your COVID mitigation plan?" You know, we were still in Laos, we hadn't been evacuated, and I thought, COVID mitigation plan, well, okay, I'll go see if I can come up with one. A year later, that's best practice. A COVID mitigation plan has to come with every single project we design now. I mean, this is a new reality of our world. It is changing the way, not just that we're traveling, but it's changing the way that we're working with local communities. Because if you have, you know, people in the urban centers that are then going out to other communities, you could easily be bringing that virus. And if you're in a rural setting that doesn't have good health care, the impact of a COVID spread would have even more devastating effects. And in many ways, you know, the work of what happened in West Africa with Ebola has been a huge learning lesson, because we learned about PPE, we learned about community-based transmission. And so we've been now drawing upon that experience globally as we create these COVID mitigation plans. And it remains to be seen, you know, how is this vaccine going to help reduce? My understanding is the vaccine, you can, even if you get vaccinated, it helps you, but you could still be a carrier. So it's not this golden ticket that I think we had all hoped for, you know, 5-6 months prior. So lessons learned will be, we need to know how to work in local communities better to make sure that we're not putting people at risk. We also need to know, we need to figure out, how do we still keep life functioning? You know, we've seen the devastating effects even in the US of having our schools closed. That's compounded abroad. It's compounded when you have economies that are based on tourism that can no longer have tourists come in. We're seeing it in Laos. Like, they've closed their borders. They did a phenomenal job protecting their country, but you know, I think it was like a third of their economy functions on income from tourism, and that's just kind of been wiped out. So we're going to have to figure out how we move forward to keep the economies open, and there's no right answer to that. I think every single one of these responses has to be tailored to the local context. I'm pretty proud that CRS does this really well, and I think in general the industry has moved that direction. You guys may know better because you're studying this right now, but there was a conference in Istanbul, I want to say like 5 years ago, that called upon INGOs and called upon donors to have local leadership in their programming. And at the time, it was because there was just a dismal rate of local leadership that was either implementing the programs or had influence on where the money was being spent. And I think COVID and the development industry is realizing that needs to be first and foremost at the center of everything that we do. We want to avoid development becoming, you know, a new form of colonization. And the only way you could do that is to make sure that while we are there to accompany, that the people that are, you know, supposedly our participants and our beneficiaries, they're leading where we are going. And it's their vision that we're collaborating with. So, you know, that's the Sahel peace building work that we're doing with the Bishops' Conference in West Africa. It's a great example. Here you have their vision and they know what they want, but they just need a little technical backup. And that's where I think we can really see some magic happen is combining those two forces. So thanks for that question. And actually, you know, as I finish there, I would be interested to hear from you three, because, you know, you're studying global development. What new trends are you seeing in your study that you think will be important in the future?
Well, I don't want to, like in class, Lauren and then Grace, you can just jump in. You don't need to wait for me to call on you.
So I'm actually not studying development, I'm studying business, but I really loved what you said about working with local leadership, because I do think, and how we don't want development to become a new form of colonization, like that is really important. that white savior stereotype type of thing. And I guess I couldn't answer your question about development trends as well, but I do have a question for you. I don't know if you want Grace to answer your question first and then come back to me, or
Grace or Gracie, do you have a quick response? Otherwise, we can also move on to Lauren's question.
I would just quickly say that, I think you highlighted a lot of, I think one of the biggest things we're seeing, just like we saw in the United States, was abroad, seeing like COVID brought to light all these other holes in infrastructure all over. So I think that's sort of what everyone is now dealing with. It's more of a broad shift, but I think that's like kind of the trend, that at least like for me, that I've been noticing, is just now people are realizing, on top of this global health crisis, there's all these other holes in our systems that we need to address. So how do we do that while dealing with the current crisis, which is obviously so much more difficult than dealing with one or the other individually.
Definitely. The platform and the framework of services, we realized how fragile it was. We had no idea until when we had to stay at home. Yeah. Gracie, did you have a response? Okay, good.
I think the two of them pretty much covered it, but I think I took to kind of answer your question about how development has progressed in kind of the academic setting. I took a development S class my sophomore year of high school, and it wasn't really based on community level development. It was more based on kind of the overarching like international level development, and that's kind of what got me into development actually. But then as taking classes in college about development, it's become more and more about the community aspects of it, which I think is really important that be covered, because like you said, that's ultimately what we need to be doing, is having that local level leadership. And I think COVID has kind of been a pinnacle for that point, and that if something happens and you don't have anyone in the actual country, what are you going to do when your organization can't run, and what perspective were you actually going from to begin with? So, like you said, I think COVID is kind of opening that door to that conversation of making sure that you are working with local level to ensure that that vision is what's being executed, as opposed to kind of what you think that vision is.
Definitely. And, your answer kind of brings to light that we have these two parts of the industry, right? We have, the programmatic, what we're doing on the ground. Oftentimes we're trying to respond to the local context, but then we also have this more academic, heady side of development that is looking at the macroeconomic trends, that is looking at the tough data. To be honest, those are the type of people that I just look to and say, please help me, because they're the really smart people in the room. And we need both. We need the data, we need the numbers, we need kind of someone to be looking at the overall trends, to be helping to guide us, to make us think bigger. Because on the flip side, you can get so focused in on what you're doing in one tiny area that you forget there's a whole macroeconomic, stratosphere that you will only be stronger if you understand how your work is impacting it. So absolutely, we have both sides of the coin.
And if I could just add real quick, I just want to connect, talking about all this community level work, connect that to the Catholic social teaching of subsidiarity, and how that really aligns, that shows, how CRS is working with its values and really applying that, which I think is really important to consider as well.
100%, and I can see your professor is beaming with joy there that you brought that up. And, Grace, if that understanding CST, it's so important if you were to come to an organization like Catholic Relief Services. It's actually, we do training for all of our staff on what CST is, and it's amazing. Like even in Laos, most of my employees there are Buddhist, but there are core human values there that are reflected in Catholic social teaching that they reflect across cultures. And subsidiarity, I think, is one of those unique, gold mines within the Catholic tradition that influence our work. And the more that we talk about it, people go, oh, in some ways, this conference in Istanbul 5 years ago, where all the development agencies were saying, we need more local leadership, for Catholic Relief Services, or just Catholics in general, to say, we have this core principle that we've been wrestling with not always doing it perfectly, but we're wrestling with it. It gives roots to the work that we do, and I can't emphasize enough, this work can get hard. There's days where you kind of am like, am I doing the right work? I don't know. I mean, there's no perfect roadmap. And if you can find roots in things like the concept of subsidiarity, just what's in the Gospels, you got to find your roots. Otherwise, it's going to be really hard on those days where the winds are blowing and you're going, I don't know if I'm cut out for this. So thanks for bringing that up. It's really key. Lauren, yeah.
Okay, so, and just to piggyback off of what you guys were talking about with the trends and like how everything has been brought to light, I feel like especially now with social media, like people our age are really looking to these organizations that are supposed to be helping in these countries and kind of putting more pressure, hopefully putting more pressure on them. And that relates to my question. So how would you compare the work you did as an intern at the UN and the work that CRS does? And is there a significant difference in how much of it is red tape versus like meaningful change?
My year at the UN, I was fresh out of college. So I had an idea of how the world worked. Didn't really know yet. And if I'm being honest, that year was tough because entering into the UN system, you see people talking in these macroeconomic terms. And oftentimes the reality of the people that are facing these extreme situations, that's not in the room. And it's tough. At some point you got to get work done, and at some point you got to become objective and you start looking at numbers and you start making decisions. But fresh out of college, I remember just being a little overwhelmed by not understanding the actual situation that was behind these discussions that I was sitting in at the UN, which is why then when I went to go work for the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program right after the UN, and this is where I was in camps in East Africa, I was one-on-one with Somali and Congolese families, helping them to gain access into the U.S. Refugee Program. And here I was sitting in front of the face of these people that just a year ago I had been hearing, back and forth negotiations about the basically the trajectory of their lives. And here I was face to face with them. That was a really important kind of dichotomy for me to wrestle with because, like I said, we need both. I mean, I think the UN system, for all of its flaws and all of its faults, it's what we have right now. And we have it, you look at the history coming out of World War II, it's because globalization requires us to have this platform where we can wrestle with these issues. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't need renewal and that, in the next decade, I hope we see renewal within the UN system. But that work does take a different mindset. And I knew after going through both the UN work and then working in the field that if I ever go back to the UN or if I ever go back to one of these, larger multilateral bodies, I'll only be a more stronger advocate and I'll only have a deeper foundation in compassion for the people that we're talking about because now I've been out in the field. And in general, with working with CRS, I don't want to speak for everyone, but you oftentimes start out working in the field and then slowly as you move up management, you slowly become less and less removed from the direct beneficiaries. And that's okay, because I think one of the huge benefits that you can bring with your education and if you develop your management skills is we don't have to be on the front lines. I mean, in many ways, like I said, we have 7,000 staff globally. Most of them are on the front lines. They're in their communities and they're the ones that take pride in delivering these services and in coming up with the solutions. Where we can really add value is kind of the technical expertise, helping to make sure that we're complying with all the U.S. government regulations, because man, are there a lot if you're going to manage U.S. government money. And that's an excellent, bridge we can have. Just yesterday, actually, I was doing a workshop with my staff in Laos, and I had this funny moment where one of my staff goes, okay, so I see we have to write this report. It has to be in English, Claire, can you please do it? And I was like, of course. You know, like, here are my staff. I'm so impressed with them, right? They all speak English, but Lao is their first language. Those languages are not anywhere near each other. And it was just a very sweet moment where she was like, it's too much for me to write that report in English. Can you do it? And I said, absolutely. That is what I'm here to do. I'm here to help bridge that gap. So I hope that kind of addressed your question on two very different types of work. They're both important. I would recommend, though, if you're thinking about going into the UN system, work for a few years on the ground. It will, I think, again, it will give you the roots and the compassion and kind of the well of experience to then draw upon, so that you don't just get caught in these kind of abstract debates that don't remember the person that's behind them all.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
That actually covered, sorry, was someone else going to say something? Okay. That actually covered a lot of what I was going to ask too. One of my major, things is like, what makes us valuable as outsiders coming in? And obviously we have our our Western education. And so, I mean, I think you kind of addressing we're there for technical support more, really was a better answer than I've gotten, I think, when I've asked the question before to other people. And it's something I think in development or international studies, even in these studies, we think about constantly is going between that, systemic institutional work that's obviously really important, but doing that on the ground, direct service, which is, obviously very important as well. I just want to reflect on some of the things that you said. You just made so many connections in your presentation between in the intersections of these issues. You talked about supply chains and waste management, and like you said, these aren't very sexy issues, but these are the issues that need attention. And even your mention of design. How designing systems and different designs affect sustainability in the long term. And this is something that I've realized lately too. It's these are all opportunities to for where people who are specialized to come in and help. So even not necessarily if people my boyfriend's in data science, so I've been seeing where those intersections are all the time lately, and it's just we could not do what we do without those pieces as well. So I mean, I know I'm sort of trying to think of where I'm specializing, specialization, because in international development, that's such a big thing, is where do I go from here? There are all these issues that I care about. Where do I go from here? So I mean, I guess just to throw that back to you, I know you kind of knew that you wanted to work with CRS for a long time, but how did you ever feel you had to specialize, or that there was a particular thing that you had to focus in on? And how did you deal with that, I guess?
It's a very good question. And thanks for your reflection there. I'm happy to hear that some of those intersections really resonated with you. When I was in college, I did international studies, right? And I had you focus, and I think I focused on poli-sci, and then I ended up taking an economics class, and I was like, wait a second, I need to better understand economics. So I switched to economics. And then, throughout my 20s, I had these fantastic work opportunities, but they were always in a little bit of a different sector. Same with my language abilities. I was learning Spanish here, I was learning Arabic there, I was placed in Kenya with Swahili there. So I felt like I was getting great little snippets, but not really specializing. And then when I started looking really seriously at CRS, we do have these technical tracks. But I found by that point, I hadn't really developed myself into one of those technical tracks. Instead, where I really found myself being useful is just in program management, in overseeing kind of the strategy of where a program was going, looking at how do you manage the finances. So I very much recommend, if you can fit in an accounting class, if you can fit in an international finance class, do that now. And like I said, I ended up doing my master's in international business because after all this experience, I realized my gap was in knowing how international financial markets work. And that absolutely affects the work that we do. You know, right now in Laos, because of the COVID situation and closing their borders, they're facing a big inflation problem where the money you get out of the banks is worth less than the money that you get on the street. That affects the salaries of our staff. It affects how far any of our procurement within country goes. It starts to affect cross-border trade. Knowing how trade deficits work is really important when you're thinking about the ramifications of how you're going to, develop your supply chains in country. We're past the age where, we can say, oops, didn't quite see that. I mean, I think it's our responsibility now as practitioners to know that we can't mess around with international markets in our work. We really can have an effect because we're procuring on pretty large scales, either whether it's food, whether it's vaccinations. So in that way, I would definitely recommend, and I know, Lauren, you're a business student, so woohoo, there's a lot of place for that kind of work and that understanding in what we're doing. And so that's kind of the direction I think I went then in specializing because, I didn't have a health background. I have a lot of colleagues that specialize in global health. They specialize in community health, and we absolutely need them too. But you gotta be on that track then. So I would say there's the health track. There's, understanding the finance and the accounting that comes behind all the work that we do. I also have a lot of colleagues who, are now specializing in waste management. I had to hire someone who was a landfill expert to come and advise us on the project in Sierra Leone. He was from Romania. And I remember thinking, never did I think that I'd be hiring a landfill management expert from Romania. But he's exactly who we needed for that project. And that's, all across CRS. We have these people in these niche knowledge areas, and then we also have people who can just generally manage our programs. And it has to be a team effort.
Sorry.
I'll throw it back to you three. What, as you kind of look to the future now, do you see yourselves going through the academia route? Do you see yourself going, working in the field, going to work for business? I would also recommend, if you get out of college, don't worry about your first step. Take a job because you never know the tiny lessons you're going to learn. Even just managing a team, you could go work at McDonald's and manage a team and know how to work with team dynamics and know how to work under the pressure of a customer in your face. Those sort of skills are incredibly useful then as you start to transition more towards, okay, what vocational career do I want to move into? You can draw upon smaller work experiences. So small caveat there, but where do you three see that you'd like to go?
I can start. So I have gone through a lot of different views of what path I see myself going down. I actually came into St. John's as an economics major. I'm not great at math. But I do get to take a few economics classes in the global development major, so it's still nice that I get that piece of it. And then recently, I've been working a lot in public health. I've been working on COVID I used to work for the government, and I was working on COVID there, and now I work for an NGO. It's also working on COVID. So I've been working on COVID since last February, March. And I've
really early days.
Very early days. And I really enjoyed this whole concept of community public health and what that means on an international scale. And originally I was looking at graduate programs in development theory and things like that, but I've actually started to look more at degrees and a future in research within public health development. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. I don't know how I want to apply that necessarily to a future career. Most likely working in some kind of research institute would be kind of the path that I'd be really interested in, but kind of just, like you said, taking random internships that I had the opportunity to access because I saw and I was like, oh, that looks kind of interesting, let me apply. Ended up turning into this topic that I've really, really enjoyed and am now looking at to continue after undergrad.
Well, as I mentioned, the project that I'm managing now is on nutrition research because what's happening in Laos is, if you want to graduate from a least developed country to a middle income country, you have to reach certain standards on your wasting and your stunting levels in country, which requires you to have good data, which requires data scientists and researchers to have interpreted that data and then to publish papers to then prove when you've kind of graduated. So, or any of our nutrition interventions, we need good research and data to base that upon. It's not my job to go out and do the research and data. I have to rely on people to do that. So if that's the future that you see for yourself, I think it's very useful in this ecosystem of actors. And we need people that do, honest research that aren't trying to, promote an outcome of, their pre-existing conditions or pre-existing thoughts. So I definitely encourage you on that route. I'm very impressed by the researchers I work with. Their concept of data science and their concept of knowing how to clean the data and then interpret it. It's tough work, and definitely a graduate program in that is it's a tall order. So I really wish you luck because it's great. It's great to hear that could be a future.
Thank you.
I can go next. So I'm in my MBA. I am in the program to get my MBA, so I'll do another year, and that will be in international business. And then I mentioned to Megan, Dr. Clark, sorry, that that I would love to apply for a Fulbright scholarship. I know you both did that program, or even just any program where I can go to another country for a year and work. So I would like to do that hands-on work right away. Even just to give an idea of what you and Grace were saying about specialization, I don't really have a path for that yet either. So I'm hoping that if I find, an organization or a program or a country that I fall in love with, that hopefully in the year or so after I graduate from my MBA, I can figure out more specifically what I want. But definitely, this type of work is exactly where I want to go. So, well, you can't go wrong with an MBA. I shouldn't say that. I say that because that's the direction I went. So, but it's the lessons you will learn of just knowing how to read your cash forecasts, how to understand accounting concepts, how to look at organizational strategy. You can use that in a variety of ways. Another way that I used my background or my degree in business was when we were in Sierra Leone. We were trying to start up an income or an impact investing opportunity, working with one of the waste companies. They had created these waste digesters, and they had a revenue generating plan for them where the waste would come in and then they could sell the output. And it was only using my business degree that I was able to go through their accounts and try to better understand, is this actually going to create cash? Is this actually going to create revenue? Are the expenses going to be too much? And that is kind of a new area that CRS has some leadership in right now in international development, is in impact investing. It's not a perfectly laid out science yet. I think we're all still wrestling with this idea of how do we get the markets to work alongside of us. It's important because, in helping the economy to grow is the key to us kind of working ourselves out of a job. But essentially, we oftentimes work where the market has failed, where the private sector just can't function because there's no way to make money in that moment. So with that kind of background, I think there'll be a lot of opportunity for you to put it to use. Great. Thanks.
Yeah. So sorry. still like digesting what other people said. I am in my third year right now, global development and sustainability and anthropology. I'm not sure if I would be going to grad school next. I'd like to do on the ground work. I'm planning on joining the Peace Corps, but I'm not sure if I would be doing that before or after grad school, depending on like if I'm able to get a graduate assistant position, which would just be like kind of too hard to turn down. But I'd like to do Peace Corps kind of wherever they would put me, really.
Mm-hmm.
Like I would like to focus a little bit on like the economic side of things, because that's kind of what I'm leaning towards. And then after that, I'm thinking grad school maybe, or before, however that happens, for maybe like international economics or something of the sort. But I actually also have been thinking about Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, which I know you attended since my freshman year. So that's something that's in the back of my mind as well. Yeah, that's just, I mean, I've like fallen in love with that school since my one professor told me about it freshman year. But I'm not really sure past that, to be honest. I'm hoping kind of that those things are going to help me narrow down what I want to do, because like I love this work CRS does. I would love to do some on the ground work and focus on that for a while. And I think that is going to help me, like you said, kind of figure out where I am more useful past that, and like where I can, apply what I've learned on the ground and through my studies to, maybe make progress that's not just on the ground.
I have a lot of colleagues that came out of Peace Corps. I think in my fellowship class, there were 25 of us, and easily 2/3 had Peace Corps. So we recruit a lot from that. So if you're able to do Peace Corps before you were to go into grad school, I think would only make you stronger. I also think that if you can have a couple years of work experience before you go into grad school, it will even make you stronger, because you'll have a sense of the direction you want to take. These grad programs are expensive, and you don't want to embark on one if you don't have I want to say just like a keen sense of the direction you're going coming out of it. I do have friends who came out of their grad program and still are kind of like, I don't really know what I want to do with my degree. If you can avoid that, try to avoid it, because it's just tough. You've learned all this phenomenal information. You really want to start honing it towards where you want to deliver it. I was just delivering this workshop with my colleagues this last week, and one of my co-presenters had come out of Peace Corps. And I was so impressed with his ability to train. And I asked him, I said, where did you learn your training skills? Because half of what we do as international staff in CRS is train to help our local staff be able to then have the capacity to go out and do the programming. And he said, I learned it in Peace Corps. He had been based in a small town on the DRC border, and almost all he did was health system trainings for the district health workers. And he had such a beautiful way of engaging our staff, really recognizing when someone's saying, yeah, I get it, and they don't get what you're saying. You got to have that intuition, and then you have to know how to nicely say, okay, well, let's try this approach, or here's another visual approach. And he learned it all in Peace Corps. So I hadn't made that connection yet, but learning training skills or teaching skills, will only make you a stronger manager, and will really help you in any of these careers in development, because it's a core part of what we do. So definitely encourage, if you have that opportunity, take it. I think that may have been one of my weaknesses, and I'm seeing it now because now I'm training and going, I got to learn how to train better. And on the Fletcher note, totally encourage Fletcher. Fletcher Mafia, we call ourselves. It's a great school, and it was the right fit for me because I knew I wanted an MBA, but the traditional MBA programs just weren't the right fit because, they're preparing you for a different type of career. They're preparing you for a career in like the American business setting, and that wasn't the direction I was going. So Fletcher has this neat hybrid where they have their Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy with their MALD degree, but then they also have the business school. So, I'm sitting in business class with people who are learning development economics, more traditional development fields, but we also have a really unique relationship with the Army and the military. So we also had a lot of Army professionals in our classes. And that sort of diversity created the types of conversations which stretched what I was learning. So another plug there for Fletcher.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
As the professor on here, I just want to emphasize that underneath all of what Claire has been saying is, don't be afraid and don't hesitate to try things out and, give a job in a different place or a volunteer program, different kinds of different experiences and field work a try, because nobody expects you to have it all figured out right now. Right? I mean, Claire talked about how she was 15 and decided that, CRS was where she wanted to go. But figuring out how to get there isn't something that just happens overnight, right? We have to give ourselves the space. And if my career has taught me anything, it's that even knowing kind of generally where you want to end up, if you are open and listening, right, that you really don't know what the next opportunity that comes in front of you will be. I was telling a couple of the students that I never thought that actually getting a faculty Fulbright was a possibility for a theology professor, because of people's understandings of church and state and those kinds of things. Yet looking at questions of women and religion and peace is something that is recognized as a priority, and yet oftentimes people don't actually think experts in theology or religion are needed at the table, which is also one place where, in my experiences elsewhere, makes CRS unique in a lot of ways, is the fact in which it is seen as a place with a table that is comfortable with who and what they stand for, right, as Catholic Relief Services, but has no problem with everybody having a seat at the table. Mm-hmm. You don't have to be right. You don't have to be Catholic. You don't have to. Right. And I still remember Hilary DeBose, who was in Gaza at the time, came and gave a talk for us a number of years ago, and she talked about a program they had that was kind of like our like debit card SNAP benefits. But so it was that kind of, and it would amplify, your purchases at certain places. And now a supermarket owner, then you would give extra onto what the benefits were as his giving as during Ramadan, because he recognized that people in the CRS programs were good at identifying who was in the most need. Huh. And so that then provided the space for him to kind of add on and build out his own personal almsgiving during Ramadan, precisely because of being welcome as part of the conversation in the work that CRS was doing in his own community. And so I think that sense of we don't have to have it all figured out, and that as long as we keep trying to build a bigger table and cultivate our ability to listen, right? We don't really know what even for us will come of who that next person comes to sit at the table will bring to the conversation. I want to, based on time, shift and ask Grace to talk a minute about a particular advocacy ask. But before I do that, she mentioned subsidiarity, and those who know me know, what do? I do Catholic social teaching. And I just wanted to point out that in his COVID messages this past summer, Pope Francis tied the virtue of subsidiarity, the principle of subsidiarity, to the virtue of hope. And that I actually was reading that message to prepare a lecture for another group that I'm doing at the end of this week. And that idea that, right, that if if we embrace subsidiarity as really being rooted in a shared sense of responsibility, and how do we all live this out? I think there's something to Pope Francis is tying it up and saying, and what this reveals, what this helps us see is the virtue of hope, which I think is something that we can all use.
Oh, that gives me chills. That is spot on. Spot on. Neat.
Oh, there is a question in the chat very quickly. If you are not, are there any barriers to a career path like yours, Claire, and working for CRS if you are not a U.S. citizen? If someone posted that in the chat, and I wanted to make sure that.
That's a great question. No, absolutely not. No, like overarching barrier, because, like I said, 7,000 staff, over 100 countries, 5 continents. If you come from a country where we have operations, you could be hired on as a national. You could also come through the fellowship. I don't think U.S. citizenship is a requirement. You just have to have the right type of visa to be in the United States. And even then, you know, CRS is always working to expand the types of people that we can get in the door, because it only makes us stronger when we get people from different backgrounds. So if that's something that you're worried about, reach out to the fellowship program. On the page, they have an inbox. The woman who runs it, I'm sure will get back to you quite quickly, and ask, you know, you could ask about your specifics. I know every citizenship requirement, it's always a little bit different. I think under this new administration, there'll be less barriers as well. So don't see that as a thing that would restrain you. I think we're always willing to work on it, and there's definitely different channels. Good question.
Great. So as we close out, I want to let Grace say a little bit about, in particular, the link that I'm posting in the chat for everyone, which is CRS's current advocacy program to help make sure that funding for development programs responding to COVID-19 is part of the COVID-19 relief package. Grace.
Thank you. So, I mean, this kind of goes along with a lot of things that Claire was talking about today, too. You know, people in developing countries right now are not just dealing with COVID. They're dealing with COVID on top of other comorbidities like cholera, typhoid, TB. And these are all things that are combining, and when you're dealing with one, it's hard, or when you're dealing with all of them, it's harder to deal with one of them individually, like we were talking about earlier. You know, even in the United States, our health systems were completely overwhelmed when COVID hit. So it's really important that we're asking you to ask your representatives that $20 billion be included in the newest COVID-19 relief bill to go towards international COVID relief. Because there hasn't really been funds that have gone out. And, you know, I was at a panel today with another representative from, I think she was from CRS, I think Guinea-Bissau, the Gambia and Senegal, yeah. And she said something like, how resilient can you ask someone to be? And it's like, and that really struck me, because it's like, you know, I alone, you know, I in my privileged United States white female existence, I am stressed out. I am overwhelmed. So how would anyone else not be, you know? And that's just something we need to think about. And, you know, different things that we touched on today as well, like it's not just a concern of health. It's the social determinants of health as well. It's education, it's infrastructure, socioeconomic statuses, like all these things go into someone's health. And, you know, like we were talking about, the infrastructure just isn't there in a lot of places. And as the United States, like we can help. So, you know, we encourage you to encourage your representatives to do so. Yeah. And I would also I know Claire talked about CRS Rice Bowl earlier. I'll put in the Venmo for our St. John CRS Rice Bowl, account. But so 25% of the funds that are received for CRS Rice Bowl go towards local poverty initiatives, and 75% go to, humanitarian work all over the world that CRS does. So, you're not just donating to help, people everywhere else, but also in our own communities, which is really important. So I'll put that Venmo at St. John's CRS in the chat.
Great. And so Venmo is a mobile, I was going to say mobile banking app, but I don't know if that's right. But it's a way like PayPal that you can, it's an app for transferring money, and it is one of those things that if you're like me and you're not particularly good at lots of this stuff, you learn about from students. But so you can see in the chat the link to which will bring you put in your information. It will tell you who your representatives are. They'll give you a space to add your own personal message. It is as easy as can be. Grace is putting in the Venmo information, and I'm also posting here a link to invite all of you to join us on March 8th for the International Women's Day for a lunchtime panel on the importance of including women in peace-building processes. To build peace, include women. And on that panel, we will have an international peace expert, Stella Sabiti, a human rights lawyer from Tunisia who's worked with UNDP and on their domestic violence laws, Emna Samari, and then Catherine Durea is a new law professor who specializes in human rights here at St. John's Law School. So I hope that you can join us on March 8th for our next conversation. And I hope I'm assuming everybody joins me in thanking Claire, Gracie, and Lauren for a wonderful conversation. And I will be posted up on our YouTube channel for those who were not able to join us or weren't able to stay the whole time. Thank you very much. It was wonderful.
Thank you, Dr. Clark and Gracie, and Lauren. So nice to meet you. I look forward to seeing what the future holds for you.
Thank you. Thank you for the great advice.